Nope. All right then. All right. So hopefully by now, you guys have begun to engage your campuses with your getting your resumes back. I mean, you'll ideally want to have your resume once you go to your mock interview, because they may ask for that. It may not be the same person that did your resume. It could be a different person. So who knows? But, you want to be as prepared to do this practice interview as possible. And the first step is to have your resume. So make sure that you are continuing to work with your campuses on your resumes, right? Many of you will be doing your mock interviews next week. I do know that there's one or two people that may do it early, and that's fine. But I'm hoping that you can read through chapter 10 before you do that interview, because there's so many different layers to interviewing. I've pretty sure if I ask anyone here, how many people love interviewing? Unless you're just that type of person that, I don't know, just likes to meet new people or torture yourself. I don't know. Most of us don't like interviewing. Like, who wants to go and talk to a stranger about yourself and, have and knowing that they're going to be talking to someone else right after you? It's almost like going on a blind date, knowing that you're number 2 out of 10, right? Like, who wants to do that? It's just so weird. But, it is, there is a technique to interviewing. So the goal of this class and tomorrow, because we'll be discussing interviewing both today and tomorrow, is to help you to understand the nuances of interviews. I want to break it down. I'm really big on the technicality of things. So I'm going to explain to you how interviews work, why they ask the questions that they ask, how to answer those questions, what are they looking for. I'm going to break it down. You are going to become an expert in interviewing. So even if you don't like it, you will be prepared. And I think that is what, many of us shy away from interviews because we just don't know how to prepare for it. So that I get really excited about chapter 10 because I just like demystifying things that people tend to, be afraid of. So, when we talk about interviewing, we know at some point all of us will be asked to interview, right? It's a job opportunity. They do it because they want to know more about you. They've read your resume. They are making assumptions based on, what you've said that you could be a potential employee. Now, most times, when you do get the call, it's either going to be on the phone or via email. Please make sure your voicemail boxes and your emails are clear. You don't want a situation where people aren't able to get a hold of you, right? Now, when you do have an interview, most times there will be an initial phone call, right? In chapter 10, it talks about just practicing good etiquette. Even with on the phone. Now we know some of us have a very unique way of answering the phone, right? Or even being on the phone. I have been guilty of, you know, seeing this number I'm not familiar with. And how do we always answer the phone when we have numbers that call us that we're not familiar with? We're more like, hello? Like, who is this calling us, right? When you are in the interviewing process, know that you could get calls and emails and texts from numbers that you don't know. So you have to stay on. You have to stay in game mode at all times. I have been guilty of having a full voicemail box. I'll say this again. When I moved here from New Jersey, I got a 407 number. Now, I was born and raised here, but I left right out of high school. So I didn't have too many people calling me, okay? But when I came back and I got a 407 phone number, I have never gotten so many spam calls in my life. I don't know if they just don't do spam in New Jersey and New York, but I don't remember ever getting as many spam calls, even when I lived in Illinois. I don't know if it's just me. I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but you get a lot of spam calls. So I actually had to change my 407 number to a 689 because I couldn't take it. Um, or maybe that number just had circled around too much. But at any rate, because I would ignore these calls, I wasn't clearing out my inbox. And I had a company that said to me, "Hey, we're trying to get a hold of you, but your voicemail box is full." How embarrassing is that? Now, luckily, people were nice enough to say, text me because they really wanted to talk to me. But can you imagine? Like, you don't want to be that. Don't have if you know that you are actively looking for a job, make sure your voicemail box is, clear. Make sure that you have a pleasant voicemail on your phone. Answer, like if you aren't sure of the number, then just let it go to voicemail and then check it, but just be very active in that process. Check your spam folders. I actually had an opportunity go to my spam. I've had that happen a number of occasions, and so, you just have to be very, very active when you are in the job market because time is money, right? You don't want to be those people that miss an opportunity because you're not being vigilant about that. When you are offered an interview, it typically is going to be one of these three different types of interviews. A screening interview, a structured interview, or an unstructured interview. Many of us will have all three for that one job. What do I mean by that? A screening interview is essentially a preliminary informal interview that you have with HR. 90% of the time, it's with HR. They are interviewing you really just to make sure that they understand what they've read on your resume. You'll always know it is a HR person or recruiter by the amount of time they want to spend with you. Most times when they reach out to you, it will be via phone or email, and they'll always say a 15-minute call, a 15-minute video. And most times it's not even a video. Most times they want a call. That is just to ensure that you are a viable candidate for that job. What will happen is they'll then put you in the pile of resumes that they will forward to the hiring manager, like the actual hiring manager, typically whoever your supervisor will be, as viable candidates. So this interview, and I know for me, I used to get really excited when I got, "Oh, we would like to interview you." And then I started recognizing that it was really just a screening interview, which is still great, right? But it's really the first step. Now, let me say this. Just because it is only a screening interview, there's still a lot you can gain from this interaction. Most times, it is an HR or recruiter. Now, if it's a recruiter, it's even better because they tend to tell you more about the position because they get paid to place you. So they'll go into detail about the job, about the company. They'll even give you tips on how to be good, right? So I like recruiters, especially if they're outside recruiters. If it's HR, they're trying to get them in, get them out. They're the ones that are going through all these different resumes. But sometimes they even have good information that you can, ask about to try to get a better sense of the job. And we'll talk about some of those things to ask as we go through this. Now, a structured interview is what many of us will have. It's also known as a formal interview or a directive interview. And this is where you will typically be in a formal setting, a conference room, for example, and you'll be asked a series of questions. Many of the questions will go from very general to very specific. And tomorrow, we are going to drill down on these different various types of questions. In this interview, this one can be both with one person or it can be with several people, right? You are probably at some corporate office. With many of you, it will be very important to ask where you are interviewing. Just because, you may know where their campus is, their main hub, your job site could be somewhere else, especially if the company that you work for works on projects. So make sure one of the questions that you ask the screening person, or the recruiter or the HR is, where am I going to do the interview? Like, don't make assumptions or don't allow them to make assumptions that you know that. There have been instances where an HR person, probably just not paying attention, has said, "Oh yeah, you're going to meet with Tom at 9." And you're maybe thinking, "Oh, I'm going to meet at the main office." And then "Oh no, we want you out, at this project site." Or you may be thinking the project site is where the office is, and they have a whole other corporate office. So one question to always ask that person is, assuming that they don't give it to you. Now, most will have enough, sense to give it to you, but some don't. Or another thing that they'll sometimes neglect to do is to tell you the person's first and last name. "Oh, you're going to be meeting with Sarah," or "Oh, you're going to be meeting with Mr. Thomas." I'm like, who's Mr. Thomas? Who's Sarah? Maybe you have more than one Thomas. Maybe you have more than one Sarah. So if they send you an email or you're talking, make sure that you ask, is it Sarah Smith? Is it, Jerry Thompson? Like, who am I meeting with? One of the reasons why you want to know their first and last name is because you're going to go Google them, but we'll talk about that. So you definitely want to make sure you know the person's first and last name and know the full address. Will most HR people know to give you that? Yes. Will sometimes they forget? Yes, especially if it's over the phone, they'll forget. Now, if they're sending it to you via email or if they're following up with an email, sometimes they'll remember, but just, hey, make sure that you ask about these structured interviews. Obviously, if it is a structured interview, you'll want to dress, I say business casual. The book talks about different dress codes from completely formal to completely casual. Yes, there are various stages of dress. I know I was even surprised when I learned how many stages of dress there are. So most people say business casual is the proper way to go. Business casual is simply, the difference between wearing a button up versus wearing a polo, right? Um, for a man, for a man, or, if someone wearing a dress, the difference between wearing something above the knee or below the knee, right? Like those nuances, the types of colors that you wear. We'll talk tomorrow too about these different biases that people have and why it's important for you to dress in certain muted colors. I know, but like I said, we're going to demystify some of this, right? So basically, structured interview, the ones that we are most familiar with, also known as a directive interview. This is where you'll be asked those series of questions. Now, The other type of interview is called an unstructured interview. This is less formal. Many of you will have this type of interview. It may even replace the structured interview. The unstructured interview is one where they'll ask you to physically come to a job. If you're in the VA program, um, your job site could be the job site, but they may ask you to dress in scrubs. Or if you're in welding or HVAC, they may ask you to wear clothing that, you don't mind getting dirty. This is another question to ask your HR person that's calling you. Is this a working interview? That means, am I going to do demonstrations? Am I going to be asked to engage with the animals? Like, nobody wants to wear their Sunday best and you're out there, dealing with animals. So another question to ask is, what type of interview? Typically, an unstructured interview is also known as a working interview. That way you'll know what to wear, right? You'll know how to dress. If they are going to have you walk around the campus, for example, and, if I'm a female, I need to know what type of shoes to put on, right? If I am on a construction site, I need to know how to dress. Am I wearing, my Sunday shoes, or am I wearing, some steel toe boots? So make sure you ask the HR person what form of interview. If it is an unstructured interview, knowing how to dress, knowing where to go, knowing how long the interview is. Sometimes unstructured interviews can last longer than a regular interview. You may want to ask that question. It will affect the rest of your day. If you have to pick up your child or, a loved one, if, the site is further from your home than what you've anticipated, you just need to make sure that you are fully prepared. So it's important that you ask that HR person those types of questions before the interview. If you are already working, you may want to take that day off, especially if it's a working interview. I would probably want to take the day off because sometimes the interview can start structured. So you may start in a conference room, and then the interview could move to an unstructured interview. I have been at an interview for 4 hours. I've been at an interview for 3 hours. Yeah. Now, luckily, I got the job. They better had given me the job because that's a very long interview. Okay. And, you want to be prepared. Yes, I interviewed at a bank before, and unbeknownst to me, you go through the first interview, then they had a second interview, then I had to take a test. And then they walked me out and they gave me the job that day. But I didn't know that it required those series of steps. So you just never know. And they didn't alert me to that fact either, right? So they're not always going to tell you. So I just say, err on the side of caution and just prepare accordingly. Now, don't ever go to a person's business and not know about the business. My friends, Companies expect you to know about their company. What do they expect you to know? Basic stuff. What do they offer? What type of customers do they have? Believe it or not, they expect you to know what if they're in the news or not. Let's say that this company is in the news because it just won a major contract, or they just merged with another company, or they just moved to a new location. They expect you to know that. Not that they are going to ask you to, recite the top 5 things you know about them, but they want to engage in conversation with you. They are under the assumption that you've done your research on them, and that is why you're there, not that you're just responding to a job posting on Indeed.com. When you are in your interview, you will be interjecting things that you know about the company. And we'll talk when we get to the question phase how to do that. But just know this, do your research. You should do that anyway, because if you have long-term goals, then your goals are going to help predict what type of company you want to work for in the first place. Think about it. If I want to start my own business, going back to our original example of becoming a master electrician, if I want to become a master electrician and own my own business, it may make sense for me to want to work at a small company. Why would I want to do that? Can someone tell me? Why would it make sense for me to want to work at a small company if I want to run my own business one day? What type of experience would I be getting from working at a small company? Probably, you know what happens at a small company? You're probably going to be doing more than just your job. You will be able to see the ins and outs of running a business better when you're working at a small company. Is that not true? If you are working at a bigger company, a larger company where everything is very segmented and dissected and departmentalized, it's very difficult for you to see the big picture on how the company runs. But if you work for a smaller company, then you get to see the ins and outs of how to run a business, right? So that is one indicator of, okay, I'm looking for a small company. Number two, maybe you look for a company that is going to be in the industry that you want to be in. Number three, maybe you may look for a company that's doing the type of work that you want to do. If I'm in electrical industry and I want to go work for low voltage, maybe I want to put up CCTVs and security alarm systems and work at either a GOA, or maybe I work for residential ADT or something like that, because maybe that's the type of business I want to do. Then I'm being very strategic about the type of company I want to work for. So those reasons alone will make me do my research on the business. Does that make sense? You see how your goals help predict where you go. This is why it's so important to have a goal. Because when you have a goal, it gives you direction. It's not just, oh, let me just get a job. Yes, okay, maybe your first job, maybe you have a goal, and maybe you may say, I'm going to go after these types of companies, but if something else comes up. But here's the thing, if you're going after those types of companies, then something is going to come up in that arena. Now, unless you just say, well, I'm just going to hope I get into that type of company, but I'm just going to apply everywhere, I wouldn't start there. I would start with, let me apply based strategically on what I'm trying to do. Does that make sense? Do you see how your long-term goals really affect your career? There is no secret to success. People don't just fall into success. You have to plan it. You have to plan it. If you are saying, okay, I want to work, I'm starting out in the VA field, but I really, really want to get into the science side of understanding pet care. So I want to go work for a major hospital, a major pet hospital. So maybe I can get into the section that deals with um, you know, terminal uh illnesses for, you know, different types of animals. Like you really want to get into that you want to specialize in that, right? If you want to specialize in that, you're probably not going to apply for jobs at the animal shelter. You see my point? But when you don't have any direction, you're just like, I'm just trying to get a job. And we all know what happens when you fail to plan, right? When you fail to plan and you just take whatever's available to you, your career can go anywhere. And that's not strategic. So by default, by following your plan, you are going to do your research on companies so that when you get there, you know very specifically why you're at that company. And that alone gives you a set of confidence because you're in the driver's seat. And most people in the driver's seat are more confident. And that's how you build that confidence, by being in the driver's seat. Now, when you're at a job interview, yes, you are going to be the focus. They are going to ask you questions. They want to know that you are the right fit. I'm going to say this to you, my friends. I know most of you will be face-to-face interviews, but be comfortable with other ways of interviewing because, again, let's say you are going to work for a major company, but their boss is in Miami and you're in Tampa. What will probably happen? They probably may not do an in-person interview. They may want to either do a virtual interview, or they may want to meet at a different location. We call that remote, or in the unstructured interviewing, it may be a remote location, but most importantly, it may not always be in person. Or maybe you may have one interview in person and may have another interview that is virtual. So you got to be comfortable with that as well. Now, when you are doing a structured interview, sometimes it's with more than one person. We call that a panel interview. Some people freak out about it. Some people love it. Most times, if it is a panel interview, it's typically your immediate supervisor. Sometimes it can be a coworker. Sometimes it can be the manager of the supervisor, the person that's over the department. Sometimes it can be someone in a different department. For example, when I worked in finance and we interviewed people, or even when I was interviewed, I got interviewed by the finance team, the marketing team, the development team. This was a nonprofit, and HR, because the work that I did dealt with each of those departments. And it was a panel interview. And I know some people hate panel interviews. I was like, listen, I don't want to keep coming back here and getting tortured and have to find a new outfit. So let's knock it out. So I was okay with the panel interview. That is another question you can ask the HR person. Who am I meeting with? Is it one person? Is it two people? So you'll have a sense of whether it's a one-person structured interview or a panel interview. So that is what that is. Now, some people don't like it, but if it's not a panel, then oftentimes, especially if the company is larger, you'll end up having to do more than one interview. You have to do one with the supervisor, one with the manager, who knows, right? So I'm all for a panel interview. I'm thinking if I have to get stressed out. I want to get stressed out one time. I don't know about the rest of you, but all right. So tomorrow we are going to dig into all these questions. We're going to dig into the behavioral questions, hypothetical questions, general questions. What does it mean? How do you answer this? Why did they ask that? We're going to really dig into it. All right. So for today, here's what I want you to do. For your question of today, I want you to answer this. What is your most hated interview question and why? What is your most hated interview question and why? Also, really quickly, guys, I put up some sample uh, statements yesterday. Yesterday, we did what we call branded statements, personal brand statements. And I noticed that maybe some people may be having a hard time doing that. So I put up some sample statements. What I am going to do is open up yesterday's live participation. Now, you won't get attendance, but if you want to take a stab at doing that personal brand statement, because you still have time to do your elevator pitch, I want to give you that opportunity to do that. I sent it via announcements. I did a sample VA, sample welding, sample electrical, sample HVAC. So for those of us that are just starting out and you're like curious, like, how do I even frame my personal brand if I'm new to the industry? So hopefully that will be helpful. And for those of you that did turn it in yesterday, I'm going to give you feedback on your branded statements. So when you check your grades, and you'll see my feedback on your statements. Okay? All right, y'all. Well, we're going to end it here with our statements. Please remember that you do have a midterm, and it will be on the chapters for this week and chapters from last week. So if you have not read your chapters, please make sure that you are reading your chapters. The midterm is open book, but my friends, you don't want to take a midterm with chapters you haven't read. Nobody has time for that. Anybody ever tried that before? It's a pain in the you know what. Like, you want to at least have some. The book is not big. It's not a hard read, right? The chapters are small. Try to read through some of that stuff so that when you take your test, you're not like frustrated. All right. And please remember, your book is virtual, so you obviously have that option to use, keyword searches and all of that, even for your book, right? But word of advice to you, it's easier to read and take a test than to have not read and take a test. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. I will see you back here tomorrow for part 2 of chapter 10. Please try to read up on chapter 10 so that if you have any questions, you can ask. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.